A sommelier walks up to a table in one of the most prestigious wine restaurants in the Napa Valley and slides the list back across the white linen cloth without being asked to, because the man sitting there is wearing a flannel shirt and has motorcycle dust on his boots and does not, in the sommelier's considered professional opinion, belong with a list like that. Not because the man had said anything wrong, not because he had ordered incorrectly, not because he had done a single thing to justify it, because of how he looked. Flannel, worn jeans, a face the sommelier recognized from somewhere but could not quite place. The sommelier sighed, with the particular smoothness of a man who has rehearsed his condescension into something resembling courtesy. That perhaps the gentleman would be more comfortable with something from the by-the-glass selection. That the reserve list could be, he paused, a lot to navigate. The man looked at the list on the table. Then he looked up at the sommelier. He smiled. He said, "I'll take my time with it, if that's all right." The sommelier did not move for a moment. Then he withdrew. 8 weeks later, the sommelier was called into a meeting with the new ownership group. The name on the acquisition documents was one he recognized immediately. He sat down slowly. There is a vineyard on the eastern slope of the Mayacamas Mountains in Napa County, California, called Bellacourt Estate. You will not find it on the first page of a travel guide. The people who know about it have known about it for 30 years, which is how they prefer it. The main house sits back from the road behind 2 rows of old-growth olive trees, their trunks the color of pewter in the morning light. The tasting room is inside a converted stone barn, built in 1912. The original eye door still visible in the high wall, now framed as a feature rather than a relic. The floors are reclaimed Douglas fir. The glasses are Zalto. The list runs to 47 pages, organized not by varietal or region, but by year of harvest, the estate's private conceit, which forces a kind of literacy the room rewards. Bellacourt produced its first estate Cabernet in 1987. It won a double gold at the San Francisco International Wine Competition the following year, and then, in the way of certain things that become instantly precious, quietly stopped entering competitions. The current vintage sold for $310 a bottle to the 1,700 names on the allocation list. You did not find Bellacourt in a wine shop. You found it because someone who already had it told you about it. The dining room held 22 seats, all by reservation. Reservations released on the first of each month at precisely 9 in the morning. The wait list was 8 months long. The sommelier's name was Renaud Lacasse. He had held the position of head sommelier at Bellacourt for 6 years. Before that, Le Bernardin in New York, 2 years. Before that, a Michelin 2-star in Lyon, where he had learned to open a bottle of Burgundy with the focus of a surgeon and the effect of a priest. He had passed his master sommelier examination on the first attempt, which fewer than 10% of candidates managed. He knew things about wine that most people who loved wine would never know. That knowledge was the architecture of his identity, and he carried it visibly, the way a man carries a credential he has paid too much for to wear lightly. He was 39 years old. He had a particular way of moving through the dining room. Unhurried, slightly elevated, the gait of someone perpetually assessing the room's readiness to receive him. The staff knew the tilt of his chin that meant the table needed attention, and the tilt that meant the table had misstepped. Both were subtle. Both were perfectly understood. It was a Thursday in mid-September. The harvest had been early that year. A warm August, fruit ahead of schedule, the air over the valley carrying the specific sweetness that comes when sugar content climbs faster than the calendar expects. Renaud had arrived at 7 that morning to receive a delivery from the cave. He had been on his feet for 9 hours by the time the last reservation of the evening was seated. A dark motorcycle had pulled into the parking area at 6:47. No advance car, no phone call to announce the arrival. A man had climbed off, removed his helmet, hung it on the handlebar, and walked toward the entrance in a flannel shirt and worn jeans and boots with the particular scuffs of real use. The host, a young woman named Simone who had been at Bellacourt for 14 months, had greeted him, checked his name against the reservation book, and shown him to the corner table by the south window, the table with the longest view down the vine rows, where the light at this hour came in low and amber and made everything look more permanent than it was. She had thought she recognized him, but was not certain enough to say anything. Renaud had not had that uncertainty. It had placed the man immediately. The face from a film, from a photograph, from one of those cultural reference points that required no context. He had also, in the same moment, registered the flannel shirt and the boots and the absence of anyone accompanying him, and the sum of those observations had produced a conclusion he reached without examining it. He walked to the corner table with the reserve list, and then, 3 steps before he arrived, changed his mind. He set the standard by-the-glass menu on the table instead. Renaud Lacasse had grown up in Beaune, in the Burgundy region of France. His father had worked the bottling line at a negociant house in the village, not the winemaking, not the cellar. The bottling line, which is the part of wine production that smells of industrial solvent and conveyor grease, and is never mentioned in the tasting notes. His mother had cleaned the administrative offices of 2 other negociant houses in town. She had worked mornings and was always home by the time school finished, which was the thing that, 30 years later, Renaud found himself most grateful for when he thought about his childhood. She was there. That was not nothing. The wine world of Beaune was everywhere around him and entirely beyond his access. He had grown up 20 minutes by bicycle from some of the most valuable agricultural land on earth. Parcel of Burgundy Grand Cru, that traded for more per square meter than penthouses in Paris, and had understood from very young exactly which side of that world he occupied. The tourists who came for the auspices de Beaune wine auction in November wore cashmere coats. His father wore a company-issue coverall. Renaud had decided at 17 that this was information, not destiny. He had studied, then studied more. He had gotten himself in front of the right people with the right combination of talent and relentlessness, and had, over 15 years of extraordinary effort, placed himself at the table he had grown up being excluded from. What he had not examined carefully enough was what that journey had done to the way he read other people. The flannel shirt and the boots and the motorcycle outside told a story. He had heard that story before. In the voices of the tourists who wandered into fine wine shops in Beaune and pointed at the expensive bottles with the frank curiosity of people who did not know they were expected to feel uncertain. He had watched the shop owner's expressions. He had learned to read what those expressions meant. He had learned to replicate them without recognizing that they belonged to the side of the table he had worked his whole life to leave. He had not thought about any of this consciously when he changed his mind about the reserve list. He had simply acted the way a person acts when a belief has become a reflex. The man at the corner table looked at the by-the-glass menu for a moment. Then he looked up. Renaud was standing 2 tables away, his attention arranged elsewhere in the professional manner of a person performing inattention. "Excuse me." Renaud turned. "I think there may have been a mix-up. I was hoping to look at the reserve list." Renaud smiled. The particular smile. Of course, the reserve list can be a great deal to take in. 47 pages. For most guests, the by-the-glass selection really does cover everything wonderfully. We have 8 options tonight, including 2 from the estate. The man looked at him for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said. "I'd still like the reserve list, if it's available." Something in the room's ambient sound seemed to shift. A couple at the adjacent table had stopped their conversation. Renaud held the pause a beat too long. Then he produced the list with the smooth efficiency of a man correcting an error he has not acknowledged making. The man opened it. It turned to page 11. He pointed to a 2009 Bellecourt Estate Cabernet and asked, in a tone that was entirely conversational, whether the vineyard's microclimate during the September of that harvest had affected the tannin development the way he thought it had. Because he had a case of the 2009 at home and had always felt it wanted another 4 years. Renaud went still. He sighed, yes. The September temperatures ran about 3 degrees cooler than average in the eastern blocks. You are correct that the tannins are still integrating. What about this one? The man turned to page 29, a 2004 from a single vineyard producer in Rutherford that Renaud had included on the list himself, a personal selection, a bottle that fewer than 6 people in the dining room's history had ever ordered. That's not many guests reach that page, Renaud said carefully. It's a beautiful list, the man said. He said it plainly, without irony, looking down at the pages, with the attention of someone in the presence of something they genuinely love. Whoever put this together knows what they're doing. Renaud stood very still. Thank you, he said. That would be me. I thought so. The man looked up. I'll have the 2009 Estate Cup, and whatever you think should go with the lamb. He handed the list back. not dismissively, with care. Renaud walked to the wine station. He stood there for a moment, with his back to the dining room. Simone, the host, was the one who confirmed the name when the reservation card came back across the stand later in the evening. She had printed it at the beginning of service, tucked it into the book without fully registering it. She looked at it properly now. She sighed nothing to Renaud that night, but she thought about the by-the-glass menu on the corner table and the way Renaud had held a pause before producing the reserve list. She had seen him do something like it before, in smaller ways with other guests who arrived in certain clothes, or alone, or without the correct performance of already belonging. She had always found a reason not to look at it directly. Tonight, she looked at it directly. She went home and sat with it for a while. She had been considering whether to stay at Bellacourt for a third year, or whether to take an offer she had received from a restaurant group in San Francisco. She had been going back and forth for 6 weeks. That night, the back and forth resolved in a way she had not expected. She decided to stay, not because of what Renaud had done, because of what she had decided she would do differently now that she had seen it clearly. 8 weeks passed. The call came to Renaud on a Tuesday morning before service. The general manager asked him to come to the administrative office at 10. Renaud had been in the building for 3 years before he understood that the administrative office, which occupied a corner of the stone barn behind the wine cave, was not where decisions were made. Decisions at Bellacourt were made by its ownership, a family trust that had operated quietly and with considerable privacy since the estate's founding. The general manager conveyed, implemented, reported. He did not originate. When Renaud arrived, there was a woman at the table he did not recognize. Her name was Helen Marsh. She was an attorney with a firm in San Francisco. She had a leather folder in front of her. Seaside, the trust, had completed a change in its structure. A new principal investor had taken a primary stake in the estate. She said she wanted to introduce him. The door to the side office opened. Renaud recognized the face in the same moment. He recognized the flannel shirt. Not the same shirt, but the same quality of shirt, worn in, chosen for comfort, carrying no statement except indifference to being assessed. The man sat down across from him. He looked the same as he had at the corner table 8 weeks earlier. Unhurried, entirely without heat. Aside, I want to tell you something before we talk about the estate. Renaud waited. The list you built is one of the finest I've seen in the valley. The 2004 Rutherford you included on page 29. That was a real choice. Most sommeliers in your position would not have taken the risk. The way the list is organized by harvest year instead of varietal. I've thought about that since I left. It requires the guest to arrive with some knowledge or to develop it, and it rewards both. That's rare. It paused. I also want to say that what happened at the beginning of that evening was not all right. You made a decision about what I was and wasn't capable of before I'd opened my mouth. He noticed. I imagine the couple at the next table noticed. And I think, if you're being honest with yourself, you know exactly what I'm describing. The room was completely quiet. Helen Marsh had closed the leather folder. Renaud looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. Yes, he said. I do. I am not here to remove you from your position. I am here because this estate and that list represent something genuinely excellent. And the person who built that list should be the person who runs the floor. But that requires that every person who walks through that door is offered the same room to surprise you. He held Renaud's gaze. Not because it is policy, because it is actually true that you do not know, until you have listened, what someone knows. He let that sit. Then, can you do that? Renaud was quiet for a long moment. Said, my father worked the bottling line at a negociant house in Bayonne. My mother cleaned offices. I grew up watching people assume what I was capable of every day. I know exactly how it feels. He stopped. I have been doing it anyway, he said. For years, I have been doing the exact thing. He looked at the man across the table. I can do better, he said. I want to. The man sat in the chair without moving for a moment. Then he nodded. He did not offer absolution. He did not say that's all I needed to hear, in the way of someone closing a ledger. He simply accepted the answer as genuine and moved on, which, Renaud would think later, was a more complete form of grace than forgiveness would have been. They talked for 90 minutes about the estate, about the harvest program, and the soil work in the eastern blocks, and whether the cave had the temperature consistency the reserve bottles required. about a new planting in the western parcel that the prior ownership had planned and never begun, about the allocation list and whether it should grow. When they finished, the man stood and shook Renaud's hand. "The list stays as it is," he said. "I want you to build the next 20 years of it." He left through the side door. Renaud sat in the chair for a while after he was gone. Helen Marsh, still at the table with her leather folder, said nothing. She was a careful reader of rooms. She gave him the time. Renaud Lacasse did not change overnight. The honest account of what happened after that Tuesday is not a transformation story. It is a recalibration story, which is a different and slower thing. It started by going back to Simone. He asked her, without preamble, whether she had observed anything on the floor over the past months that she had not felt comfortable raising with him. He asked it directly, without softening the question into something easier to answer no to. She looked at him for a moment. Then she told him. It took 35 minutes. He listened without interrupting. Some of it was minor, small tonal things easily adjusted. Some of it was not minor at all. He thanked her when she finished. He meant it. It changed 3 things immediately. The by-the-glass menu came off the tables entirely. No longer the default presented before a guest could indicate preference. Instead, the host's greeting included a simple question. Would you like to see the full reserve list, or would you prefer we walk you through tonight's selections? The question gave guests agency without implying they were expected to know which to choose. It turned out that most guests, given the choice, wanted the reserve list. They had simply been waiting for permission to ask. The second change was slower. It began conducting monthly staff tastings, not technical education sessions, but conversations about the estate story, about the logic of the list, about why certain bottles were there. It wanted the entire floor staff to be able to talk about the wine the way he could talk about it, not with his credentials, but with his love for it. It found that when they understood why the list was organized the way it was, they stopped apologizing for its difficulty and started offering it as an invitation. The third change was the hardest, and it was entirely internal, which made it impossible to schedule or measure. He had thought about his father on the bottling line more in the 3 months after that Tuesday than he had in the previous 3 years. He had thought about the version of himself that had internalized the assumption of who does and does not belong. The version that had built its professional identity partly on the right to make that call. That version had produced excellent wine service for 6 years. It had also produced something he was less comfortable naming now that he had looked at it. He kept looking at it. He did not stop. Simone had decided to stay for a 3rd year, then a 4th. In her 2nd year after the change in ownership, she was promoted to floor manager. In her 3rd, she was given responsibility for the by-reservation dinner series that the new principal had proposed. An evening each month, where 8 seats from the allocation list were reserved for guests nominated by community organizations in the Napa and Sonoma valleys. No charity seats, not a reduced menu, the same experience, the same sommelier service, the same 47-page list. Teachers, nurses, a retired farm worker named Arturo Vega, who had been tending vines in the valley for 31 years and had never once sat at a table in one of the estates he had helped produce. Arturo had asked Renaud that evening about the 1998 vintage in the Eastern Blocks, about whether the smoke from the late-season fires that year had affected the fruit the way some people claimed. Renaud had pulled a stool up to the table and sat down. They had talked for 40 minutes. The estate issued a brief statement when the change in ownership was made public. 2 paragraphs factual, no elaboration beyond what the transaction required. The new principal was quoted once. Bellacourt makes something exceptional. The work now is to make sure that more people have access to what exceptional feels like. It was not present when the statement was released. He was, according to the general manager, somewhere on a motorcycle. Years later, in an interview about the valley's changing ownership landscape, a journalist asked Renaud about the transition. He was quiet for a moment before he answered. Aside, the most important thing that had changed was not the programming or the policy or even the monthly dinners, as meaningful as those were. Aside, the most important thing was that he had stopped assuming he already knew what someone was about to show him. The journalist asked what had caused that change. Renaud smiled. Aside, someone offered me the chance to look at something I had been not looking at, and I took it. He did not name the person. He did not need to. I do not think this story is about wine. I mean, it is. In all the particulars, the list, the cave, the by-the-glass menu left on a table for the wrong reasons. Those particulars matter. The specificity of the world is part of why the story holds. But what I keep coming back to is not the sommelier's mistake. Plenty of people make that mistake and never get near a reason to stop. What I keep coming back to is the moment in the side office when Renaud said, "I have been doing the exact thing. No hedge, no context offered in mitigation. No detour through the pressures of his industry or the particular difficulty of his position. Just, I know how this feels and I have been doing it anyway and I want to do better." I think it is very hard to say that. I think the distance between knowing something about yourself and being able to say it plainly in a room to another person, that distance is not short. Most of us find a way to stay on the knowing side of it without ever reaching the saying side. Renaud reached the saying side. I think that matters more than what happened before it. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for generosity, humility, and genuine love for the craft of things done well. If this one stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me what you took from it. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next one comes. See you in the next one.